Hi, everybody. Kim Skorupski, your host from Hopkins, and I'm looking at Dr. Peter Denson from Iowa. Hi, Dr. Peter.
Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for inviting me on your show.
Dr. Denson, will you please tell everybody who you are and what you do at Iowa?
I'll skip all the little interim steps that got me to Iowa, but I've been in Iowa now for almost 40 years. About 50% of that time has been in higher medical administration as first dean of students of curriculum, head of medicine, and then as the executive dean for the college. And when I was the executive dean, we were hiring a lot of different people, and some of these people needed coaching, and I got interested in coaching, and I've always been interested in mentoring, and it gives me a lot of pleasure. So at some point in that, I decided that I'd had enough, and I went into part-time work. And as part of the part-time work, I continued coaching, and one of my colleagues gave me a book on transitions instead of the usual kind of, funny gifts about here's some depends in your retirement and that kind of thing. And it was the usual kind of thing, when you retire, you got to have a hobby. You can't just have nothing. Don't make any major decisions in your first year. But it got me interested, and I started going down the transition rabbit hole and getting into what's known about transitions in the literature. And I saw that what I had previously thought were very independent kinds of interactions when I was helping students or helping trainees or division directors, department heads, and deans in this coaching process, I didn't really see much of a connect, but the transition theory sort of provided the connection that I was looking for mainstream.
What really got you, stuck on this transition theory, and how does it make sense to you? I want to learn more about it.
Yeah. So a lot of my mentoring and coaching work has been done with leaders. And I've learned that although it may differ from one institution to another, people are chosen for leadership positions or position meaning. Often institutions use proxies for leadership. Sometimes this works out well, and sometimes it works out less well. And what I learned from that was that when the proxy is not accurate, the coaching can be very helpful in reorienting individuals and saving their careers, so to speak. And part of that disconnect can be both from the individual and from the institution's failure to recognize that assuming a new leadership role represents a transition. So, when you think about transitions, the way I like to think about them is that, what is a transition? Well, a transition is a change from one state or condition to another, and they can be simple or they can be complex. And a simple one is just things we do every day. We go from one meeting to another, we transition, and we have to adapt to whatever that meeting is going to be. It's just usually the environment changes, but it's the changing of gears is very predictable. But the kind of transition we're talking about is a transformational transition. And in this change, it's not the environment that's changing, it's the person who's changing. And the environment can stay the same or it can change. And, if you really want an example of this, being a chem major, then, physical chemistry, I like to think in these terms. And so it's ice to water and water to water vapor. So that's where I've started, the transformational kinds of transitions. They're really interesting, and they involve reorientation and redefinition for the individual or the institution. They involve cognitive, emotional, psychosocial, and behavioral adjustments. So that's what makes them complex. And from a coaching standpoint, or helping people succeed, that's what makes them so fascinating. And there are three phases that, from where I come from: an ending, a period of uncertainty, and a new beginning. Is that your understanding too, Kim? Because I gather you know something about these things.
Well, I've not thought about it in those, discrete kind of stages, and ending, a period of uncertainty, and the new beginning. So this is a new way of thinking about, the transitions. But, as you were talking, I'm putting myself in the shoes of leaders and the shoes of faculty members, and thinking about the various transitions across the life course of an academic medicine faculty member. And I think where we get ourselves can get ourselves into trouble is making a lot of assumptions about the next thing, whatever that, you said, distinguishing from environmental changes and transformations to person changes. And we always think about in our leadership programs, leader change thyself. And I'm seeing the challenge of that transition is making assumptions that either I don't want that next thing because that does not appeal to me, without recognizing that I can get to that leadership position and change it into what I want. So seeing something as it is and assuming that that's the way it must be, or the flip side of a possible transition of thinking, oh, that's an easy thing, I can do that, no problem. And that level of arrogance of making an assumption that there's nothing to that, without realizing the hidden iceberg underneath that, say, leader position of like, oh, I can do what Denson does. That seems pretty easy. Look at him. He's got water off a duck. He got that. And then you get into Peter Denson's role and you go, oh, I had no idea it was this difficult. So that's what I'm thinking when you're talking about transitions of the complete, opposite ways of people that we can respond. So many ways we can respond to transitions. Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, looking at an esteemed guest, Dr. Lawrence J. Apple. Hi, Larry.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm so glad to have you here, folks. Dr. Larry Apple. He is the C. David Molina, MD, MPH, Professor of Medicine with joint appointments in epidemiology and international health and nursing. I read about Larry, and folks, just as a little PS there, Dr. Apple probably at today's recording has over 700 peer-reviewed publications. So he's here to share with the world his plans to think about life post full-time employment. Again, Larry Apple, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Tell us your story.
Okay, sure. I had spreadsheets that I had made, and it was a process, and it was an integrated process. It integrates not just myself, but my wife and her plans. But a lot of it did have to do with what I would, when I was going to retire, and the lead up to that point in time. Even though you're focused, myself, I was been focusing on the taper of work. You actually have to transition into retirement. So a good part of this is thinking about, you're sort of like, you're tapering down, but you actually need to taper up,
Something
in
else.
terms of other things.
Right.
And and there are several areas that I haven't spent as much time doing. And one of them, I think, is just social, relationships. All my virtually, I would say, well over half of my, friendships are through people at work.
Right.
And, when I, leave Hopkins, I'm going to have to, I think community is really important, incredibly important. And so, reestablishing friendships, creating new friendships, I think is going to be incredibly, is going to probably be the key to a successful retirement. And just to give an example, I got back last week after a 2-week trip to the Amalfi Coast. And did I just go on that trip, but I went with my roommate from college, who I promised I would go every 4 years to a new country with him and his wife, but that never happened. This is the first time. And so that's sort of an example of some of one specific activity, but I think that was a sort of a key revelation to me, is that I really need to not just taper down work, but sort of increase. So
you mentioned that bad word that kind of made me cringe a little bit, spreadsheets. You said, I had spreadsheets. And I'm sure a lot of people like me who don't like spreadsheets are like, oh man, I got to do a spreadsheet. But when you started, all right, plotting this out like a research study, what's the aim? What are the hypotheses? What are the methodologies?
No, there's no aim hypotheses. There's no aim hypotheses. The columns are easy. It's month or quarter, year. And, I had, one column July 2026 where there's an R, that's retirement, okay? And then another row for like the Wealth Center. When am I going to end? Which is right about now. Actually, I wanted to end about 2 quarters ago, but then I have another facility that I run, Pro Health, and when that's going to end, I'm PI of one major project or center. When am I going to transfer that? And I've already spoken to the people who are going to take over these. And so those are sort of like the key rows. And then I actually have some things that are just, that are sort of sentinel issues, like with this facility that I run. When is the lease up? That's really a defining point about whether that facility will stay afloat or not. Is there a business plan for that facility to stay afloat? Pro Health, that's the facility I run. You might be familiar with it. So yeah, it's just like a master list, and then I clip off the column when I'm finished with that, and it makes it easy. And then one of the numbers at the top is what my effort is: 100%, 80%, 60%, and yeah. So, anyways, it's not a complex spreadsheet.
All right. Tell us, if you will, if something's going to go a little wonky or sideways, where do you anticipate? So you just kind of mentioned Pro Health and like the lease. Where might you, or maybe you've already had to monkey around with those spreadsheet values or deadlines or timelines? Because I'm thinking about succession planning. And obviously someone like you who's been doing this your whole life, you have to become good at teams and building teams and finding people who lead and have different strengths in different areas. So in that spreadsheet thought process, how did you find or identify who you'll hand the baton to, and where have you had to make adjustments or kind of pull back or rethink something? Have you had a little bit of whoopsies in there?
Some delays, but like the Wealth Center took about 6 more months than I thought. But Wealth Center is an academic unit; it's highly valued, and so I just said I notified the leadership, who then said they initiated the search process and formal review. My challenge, and it's not a hiccup yet, but it could be, is figuring out who's going to lead Pro Health, which is this offsite clinical research unit that has about $500,000 in overhead every year, and for a long period of time, I have other people that are doing, mostly from the Wealth Center and General Internal Medicine, who are doing grants there, but I probably brought in well over half, maybe 2/3 of the grants that kept that afloat. Who is going to do that? And I think it's a valuable resource, but it's also a challenge because it's not a discrete academic unit. It's not a department, and it's not an institute. So that is where the rubber hits the road. But that's also part of the benefit of signing the Senior Faculty Transition Program, because on July 2nd, 2026, I'm retired, whether or not there's a plan for Pro Health or not, and then the can gets kicked up to the people who are still here. Now, I don't want to do that. I really want Pro Health to succeed, so I'm not going to to just wait and let it fall apart. I want it to succeed. That's the headache that I have, and that's what keeps me awake at night. Intermittently, to try to figure out that the complexity of succession for that. Everything else is relatively easy. Another thing that happened that along these lines is people have asked me to get on grants, not because I have a major role, but they like having me on board as sort of like an advisory capacity to help them think through whether it's a clinical trial or helping them get the grant because I have some expertise in an area that is appropriate for the study. But I upfront, I basically say, I'm not going to be around to the end of the grant. I'm retiring, and I will participate in it, but I'm just going to be upfront. I don't want a large role. I'm not going to be in a leadership role. And after about a year or two, you're going to have to find somebody else to run it. That's, but that you have to start doing almost immediately when you are at that point of, like knowing when you're going to retire. And for me, I did know that when I reached 70, that I want to retire. That has been on the spreadsheet pre-COVID, before any of the challenges that we have now in the School of Medicine. So that was there. It wasn't precipitated by any of these things. That was a fixed time point from about 10 years ago.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. I'm Kim Skarupski, and I'm looking at Dr. Maria Oliva Hamker. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Kim. I thought one of the aspects that I could bring to the table is to talk about transitions in your life and transitioning into a leadership position, because this is a time when things can be very kind of scary for somebody and challenging. And over my career, I've had some transitions into leadership positions at different points in time, and you always learn a little bit as you go along. I think of myself first as a faculty member. I'm an academic clinician, and I've been here at Hopkins actually my entire career. I also trained at Hopkins as a pediatric gastroenterologist. So throughout that time, and still to this day, I'm involved in patient care, doing inpatient rounds, having ambulatory clinics, doing endoscopies, and teaching our students, our residents, and our fellows. And as all of our colleagues, we multitask. I'm also a clinical researcher, and I've been focusing on inflammatory bowel diseases. Since I've transitioned into a variety of leadership roles throughout my career, I thought I would have the opportunity to give your audience maybe some tips about what to think about. The first thing is starting with the fact that a leadership role doesn't necessarily mean that you are now being named to a new particular role, like a division director, department director, or another role in your institution. Taking on a leadership role can also mean that you are now becoming, for example, the chair of a task force or the chair of a committee in your professional society. So some of these leadership positions might be for a year in length, and others might be, you hope, will last a bit longer, 3 years, 5 years, or even longer. But the same type of thought processes can an approach can be used for different types of leadership positions. And it's a bit of a yin and a yang, because as a new leader, you need a vision and a plan, but you want to hit the ground running. But then at the same time, you also need to listen and develop new collaborations and relationships. So regardless of what group of people you will be leading or what your new role is going to be, again, there are certain tips that would be good to have, regardless of what type of role you're going to be assuming.
Yeah, I've learned so many lessons, and I keep having to relearn them. So that's what frustrates me, is I always feel like I get frustrated, like, Kimberly, haven't you learned this lesson already? And I say, yes, you have. In fact, many times, when are you finally going to learn? Because there's a certain level of frustration, I think, because we all want to do a great job. And, as you said, we want to make an impact and make a difference, and we want to do good things. And yet that urge to rush out of the starting gate, is the good discernment tempers us to say, slow down a minute. Who else is at the table or in the room?
Yes.
What are the competing priorities? And that's always my one of my many bugaboos, is failing or not seeing the whole picture. And I think with a lot of our leaders, we get frustrated thinking, how come they're not doing, isn't this so important? How come they're not doing that, without recognizing there's so many other priorities and ours isn't the most important.
Well, but one of the things that you said, Kim, is that the first thing I think a person should do as they're kind of coming into this role is they really have to take stock in terms of what's going on and learn. And I always kind of view it as again, being a clinician, it's kind of similarly when you meet a new patient for the first time, you have to take that patient's history and exam, and you'll probably need some help from others that'll do some labs or imaging studies, and then you're going to come up with this differential diagnosis, right? Potential list of diagnoses, and that'll help you with the plan. Well, it's kind of the same thing, that you want to kind of take stock in the situation. You want to learn the culture and the people of your new environment. And this is where I think it's just so important to listen to others, because you need to understand whether it's your new team, the new committee, the people that are reporting to you, your new boss. You need to know who the influencers are and who are the stakeholders. And so I found that you just need to talk to people, or rather, I probably shouldn't say talk, I should say listen to people. I know that when I became vice dean, I made it a priority to try to meet people in person, especially all the department directors who were now going to be kind of a new group of colleagues that I didn't have previously. And so I wanted to meet them where they lived at work, so to speak, because it's important to go into somebody else's work home, see how they are, and just and chat with them. And I thought that was important for them to obviously get to know me, but also for me to hear what concerns they had, or what they hoped our office of faculty, would bring to them. So I thought that was, really important, just as important as it was clearly to meet with all of our team, everybody in the office of faculty, find out what folks are doing, what their anticipated goals were, because certainly when there's a leadership change, it can be a scary time for people. The people that now are seeing a new leader in terms of, so what's this person all about? What changes are they going to make? We as humans don't necessarily love change all the time. And so I think it's really in those first times after you step into a new role, it's so important to begin relationship building and developing collaborations with others.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your approach to relationship building, and how do you discern which people are like in your closest inner circle and going out, and how do you make decisions about change management, for example? You said how things are going to change when you a new leader coming in, because I'm always curious how I watch big leaders and deans and professional society leaders come in, and they take like a right-hand person or a right-hand or a small group of people. How do you know who should be in that circle to change things? Or is it not like I keep thinking of Abraham Lincoln and this great book, Team of Rivals, where
Team of Rivals, yes,
right, where he brought in on purpose his opponents. And so I'm always curious how people gather their team to get the champions and the supporters, but sometimes the naysayers, sometimes who are the opposite kind of the fault finders, maybe purposely tasked to be that kind of avoiding groupthink. But how do you, as a leader, as you've gone through those stages, how have you learned that skill of being able to discern who's real and who is maybe peripheral? Or how do you do that? Or does that change?
Yeah, I think that changes, and that's a great question. And it also depends, Kim, obviously, if you're coming in to a situation in which there is a need and you were brought in specifically to turn over a team or to create a team, versus coming into a situation where there's a team that is running pretty smoothly and you don't necessarily have to blow up everything. It's a matter of maybe inserting new ideas but keeping a well-oiled machine going. So what I would say are aspects of team building and team creating that I feel are important over time is, I will say for me, a key factor is a person's integrity, the honesty and the authenticity with which they are approaching a situation, right? You want people around you that have a positive attitude, kind of a can-do attitude, and you have to bring people with different skill sets to the table to make kind of that unifying team. I mean, I remember as a division director, actually, when I started running the division, there were only 4 of us at that time in pediatric gastroenterology, and now the division has been built and it's more than almost fourfold as big. It's become very, very large. And as that group was being built, I could see that there were people that had certain skills in terms of just their knowledge base was incredible, or they would be very skillful in procedures, or they are very skillful in the informatics and technology. And so I could see that they would bring different skill sets to the table to make us whole, to make our division whole. I think the same thing happens at multiple levels. Ultimately, although people may think differently from you, and I'm a believer that you always want to have a lot of people that are way smarter than you around you, because we're all, in this win-win situation. It does come down to who is authentic, who has integrity, who is an honest person, who is somebody that you can trust. And it's that trust factor, I think, that allows you to bring somebody in closer to you, because you want to be able to say things in confidence to people and know that they're not going to necessarily be distributed to everyone. You want people that are thinkers and will give honest opinions in a respectful way, which I think leads me to say that you don't necessarily want to surround yourself with people that all think the same and that have your same personality type.
Right.
That's a no-no. Learning about personality types and how people approach situations differently is something that I learned way back, actually, when I was a junior faculty member taking leadership courses here at Hopkins. And I realized, oh, yes, that's right. And there's a name to give these people and these different personality types. And as I was learning that, I already could say, no wonder I'm having some difficulties with this particular person, because we're coming to the table with, from totally opposite ends of the spectrum. And so certainly acquiring skills and being taught those types of, kind of leadership information, I think was really important for me in my career. It's certainly something that I would recommend to anyone out there who is interested in any type of leadership positions, that you really do want to acquire these skills and be taught them. They're not necessarily intuitive, and it's really important.
Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.